Well, hello everyone, and welcome to our regular monthly engineering webinar. Glad to have everybody with us, and we're running sort of one-armed here. We're trying to get some technical stuff straightened out. Zoom keeps changing stuff on us, as John and I were talking about earlier, but we're glad to have you with us, and it's going to be a good program. I can assure you that. And let's see if I can do some switching here and welcome everybody. I want to tell everybody that the program is actually sponsored by our good buddy who is actually on the call with us today, John George. John, welcome to the program.
Well, thank you much.
And John has his own little uh, arts and crafts show. No, really, he has a nice company with ours, especially South. And he, I suppose, handles everything from the microphone all the way to the light bulb on top of the tower. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And everything in between, even wire, I suppose.
Yeah, though we don't, most of it now is Ethernet, so that's readily available everywhere. I get very few calls anymore for what we know is audio cable.
I know a stereo two-pair audio cable.
Yeah.
Of course, the phone company, they're all changing as well. They're all going to fiber. And I saw the other day by the side of the road was a whole roll. They had just rolled up some copper they had taken down off the poles. And I said, well, if they'll leave it there for about 5 minutes, I'm sure that somebody will come by and pick it up
Oh, I'm sure
and
that's true.
take it somewhere.
Very much so.
All right, my computer is just really getting ahead of itself here. And get off of this here. All right, John, I'm going to do some stuff here. What we wanted to talk about on the program today and is something that both John and I are involved in, and that's the Alternative Broadcast Inspection Program. Now, John, how long you been involved in that?
Gosh, I think, well, since it pretty much started, I that goes back to, I guess it was late 90s, mid 90s. Uh, I remember that in South Carolina, we had our first training session when I think it was Fred Brose came over from the FCC
Mm-hmm.
office in Atlanta and provided training for a group of engineers in the upstate of South Carolina. And, we spread out from there. And it's been quite a while.
Oh, I know. Oh, let's see here. As I told you, we were trying to do some switching around here, and now I can't get my share to work. Zoom, as nice as they are, doesn't seem to take the change very much. Let me get off of this here. Let's see. Oh, now we're here. I think that's good. Oh, here we go. And let's go to this slide here. And we're going to talk about and we mentioned already about the history of the program. And if I'm correct, and correct me if I'm wrong, it actually started in Missouri.
Yes, actually, at the time, the FCC field office in Kansas City uh, got together with a couple of states out in that area, particularly Missouri and Kansas, and they actually wrote. I think it was Ron Ramage, who was the one of the previous directors for the Atlanta field office. Actually, was instrumental along with several other people we've had out of Atlanta and in Kansas City in writing the first self-inspection guides and getting the program started.
Right. Talk about just briefly what the goals are of the ABIP program and why it's beneficial to a station.
Well, the goals are really to do an FCC type inspection and work with the station as part of that inspection, to review all the safety aspects and the technical aspects of the operation to ensure that the station is operating in compliance with FCC rules and regulations. And of course, there is a certificate if the station passes that is provided that gives them kind of a free pass from a inspection as long as it wasn't ordered from Washington or a complaint was filed, official complaint filed against the station. Uh, Over the years, the FCC always had the right to inspect any radio or TV station, cable system, or any operation that comes under the rules and regulations of Federal Communications Commission, and they can inspect those stations at any time. Basically, this program says that the station is in compliance, and if a commission inspector comes by and just stopping in because they were passing down the road, they see the certificate and the inspection is bypassed and they go on their merry way. We also do kind of a cursory inspection of the public files, but the public files, since they've been online, uh, are now available for direct inspection by the Enforcement Bureau in Washington. So they can inspect it anytime they want, and they do, and they can hand out notices of violations at any time they want. So we do that as just an extra added feature to the inspection that we provide so that if a station maybe has filed a quarterly issues and programs late or didn't file it at all or missed some of the annual reports that are required for both television and radio, they would at least be aware of it and can take corrective measures as such.
Yeah, the public file typically is not something that an engineer is involved in, although some engineers do get involved in it, but there's not a lot of technical stuff in there. It's mostly legal and operational stuff that, as most of you know, used to be in a file drawer in somebody's office. We just had reams of paper in there, and then they, as you say, put it online. So, but I think it's very important that an engineer, and I'm sure you share this with the people that you inspect as well. It's important that the engineer have a basic understanding of what the public file is and what's supposed to be in there.
Yes, and I find that in a lot of stations you go in, and particularly the ones that have full-time engineers there on their staff, that the staff members have a tendency to look at the engineer for answering questions dealing with all facets of FCC rules and regulations, including the online public files, because engineers, as part of all of our jobs as being an engineer, you have to be well versed in the rules and regulations, and so kind of becomes the resident expert.
Yeah, that's what I found out. You know that they think anything that has to do with the commission, the engineer should be involved. So you're exactly right on that. What we normally do on the public file is John and I will both review it, come up with a checklist. We have a checklist, and then we'll share any issue that we may come across with the manager. So, and my thinking in doing that is that if you don't look at the public file for them, they may be doing something wrong or not correct and not know it. So if you
Well,
don't go through it and share that with them, it would just accumulate.
yeah, I'll give you a good example. I've seen several cases over the past few years recently that one station, the person that had been doing the quarterly issues and programs retired, and the new person came in, and there was some misunderstanding somewhere along the way, and they thought that the quarterly issues and programs were to be filed annually, not quarterly. And I went to another station where the person in charge of the quarterly issues and programs had moved to another operation in another city, and the new person that took over didn't realize part of his job responsibility was the quarterly issues and programs. And luckily, we got there, and they had only missed filing 3 quarters. in that year. But if we hadn't had an inspection at that time, they could have missed several years worth, and the commission does issue fines for that. Usually, those fines are issued at license renewal time, but there's no reason why the commission wouldn't do it at any time during the license period.
And they can be rather costly.
Yes,
If
very
they
true.
find that stuff. I usually share, and we'll move on to technical stuff here in a second. But I usually share with stations is that maintaining the public file is really not a difficult job if you just pay attention and have somebody in the station responsible to maintain it. And then I always suggest I say create you a calendar, what I like to call an FCC calendar, and write down all the dates on that calendar that certain documents need to be uploaded to that file, and back up a couple of weeks and put a note that this coming up. That way you're not caught right at the last minute trying to get things together. And that's especially true with issues and programs. You don't wait till the eighth of the following month at the end of the quarter to start putting it together.
Yeah, very, very true. And really, most of the stations do have communications attorneys, and these attorneys usually compile a list of FCC dates and make those available to their clients. So it's a very easy document, a calendar to get a hold of without having to manually put it together yourself.
Yeah, that's right. Especially the group owners, they have a whole department that takes care of that for all their stations. But just pay attention to the dates and make sure everything is in there and in the right folder. So let's move on and talk about here are some documents we'll touch on that are not necessarily or normally not in the public file, but there are documents that are required for you to have on hand. And you might talk about these three here, John.
All right. Well, first, the NRSC measurements. These are particular to AM stations, though measurements are important for all stations. But for AM stations, NRSC measurements are to be made annually, not to exceed, I think it's 14 months, if I'm correct.
I think so,
Uh,
14.
Right, and this is an annual thing, and in the rules, you're required to keep uh, the current year and the previous year. So you have to have 2 years worth of measurements in your engineering file to any inspector that comes, whether it would be an ABIP inspector or it would be the FCC. I will mention for FM, anytime you change a component in the actual RF chain, and that would be like an audio processor that has a stereo generator that's being used in it, or uh, the exciter or a transmitter. You need to do a spectral analysis or a spectrum measurement to ensure that there is no interference being created to any other stations, or you're sending spurs out that might be interfering with other services such as wireless communications, FAA, that kind of thing.
That
So that's
includes
not,
transmitters as well.
that is correct. That is correct. So you certainly want to be sure that if you replace a transmitter, you change out a transmitter, you say you move one from one station to another station, it's still considered a new transmitter in the eyes of the rules, or you change out a exciter or even an audio processor, you're supposed to check this. Uh, the station log, of course, we see a lot of problems. Most people think that's the EAS log, and technically that is what it deals with most, is EAS operation, but it also deals with tower lights. It deals with quarterly tower light inspections that are required. That is, if you own the tower or you are responsible for the tower. Then, of course, any discrepancies in operation, day-to-day operation, such as you had to operate at reduced power for a couple hours, that's all noted in the station log. So it does not necessarily include the day-to-day transmitter readings. That's a separate document, and it's kind of interesting. The FCC did away with that rule that required transmitter readings, and of course, Larry and I, when we both first got started in the business, you had to check the transmitter readings every 30 minutes,
Right.
and and then it spread out to every 3 hours, and then they did away with it. Now, the interesting note on this is if an inspector calls you and they say you're operating over power or you've been operating under power or whatever the case, or you haven't been changing pattern at the proper time with your AM operation, how do you prove it if you don't keep the readings and the pattern changes in a document of some type? So while you're not required to have it, it's one of those good things that you should have at all times. But the station log, again, is all EAS activity. That means the required weekly test, the required monthly test, and in most situations, each station is going to receive 3 weekly tests. That would be one from the LP1, one from the LP2, and the other would be from FEMA IPAWS. And that test comes down on the East Coast, it's at 11:01 a.m. And everywhere else, it's 11 o'clock a.m. straight up. I'm not sure why it's different on the East Coast than Central and Mountain and West Coast times. But that's all required to be logged in this log, as well as the station's required weekly test. And then, of course, the monthly test as well, too.
Yeah, the monthly test has to be received and uh, relayed within a 60-minute window. So,
Yes. And then the antenna structure registration, that's an interesting document uh, because uh, you want to be sure that you have a copy of who owns the tower, pardon me, uh, in with your license information, whether it's your company that you work for or whether it's another company that is an owner of multiple towers, like an American Tower, a Crown Castle, Vertical Bridge, those companies. It's also, if you're leasing from one of those companies, it's also great to have a letter of understanding as to who's responsible for the tower lighting, maintenance of the tower lighting, and any general maintenance on that tower, because that does offer you some protection. But should you be renting from someone who does not maintain their tower properly and has problems with lighting, the commission and the FAA very easily could come to you as one of the uh, people renting on that tower or leasing on that tower and make it your responsibility. So there's always a certain amount of responsibility for that. One
yeah.
other little quirk of antenna structure registration, if your station is sold from one company to another company, a lot of times that document does not get updated as part of the final sale. Why? I don't know, but it happens a lot. So you want to be sure that that document is updated and that the information is correct, because if the commission goes to make contact and the wrong information is there, they certainly can issue a fine.
Yeah, I've seen that several times where a station buys another station or sells to another station, and you don't. You actually have to file a new form, 854, I think it is, to change the actual ownership of the structure itself. A couple of other items here. You talked about this briefly, the quarterly tower light inspection. That obviously every 3 months you're supposed to check not just the lights themselves, but the entire lighting system, which includes the controller, photocell, alarm systems, and heights reporting, and a notation, as John said, of that quarterly tower light inspection of the tower light system, we should call it. Inspection should be included in the station log.
Yeah, I find this to be A common issue in inspections these days is people that do have towers forget to do the quarterly tower light inspection. They'll come back and say, "Well, we log it every day," or we'll have, uh, I saw it working when I was out at the transmitter site, but it actually does state in the rules that you need to simulate a tower light failure uh, and confirm that everything is working as it should. In other words, the lights go out, the remote control or whatever monitoring system you have is suddenly triggered, and either they get a call or you get a call and know that there's a tower light issue.
That's correct. Also, the equipment performance measurement that sort of goes along with what you talked about before. I think the NRAC measurements.
Correct. And that's a requirement again, as I mentioned, when you change out any equipment in the actual RF chain. So again, stereo generators, which would be in your audio processor unless you use a separate one, exciter, and of course the transmitter itself.
This next item is a little controversial. Schedule of maintenance or maintenance log. I cannot find anywhere in the commission rules where the word maintenance log is listed. However, that being said, the commission does have in their rules a statement that you must regularly inspect your operation to make sure it's complying with rules and regulations. Well, how are you going to comply with that and let somebody, the commission, know unless you keep some sort of a log that you've been looking at your system? So I think it's imperative that that an engineer keeps some sort of a maintenance log, especially at the transmitter, to keep up with every time you make your visit out there. Just make a note, even if you don't do anything. If everything's okay, just sign and date it, showing that you have visited to ensure that everything is comply with the rules.
Yes, that really comes under a topic that we don't hear a lot about anymore, but it used to be used a lot in the business, and it's called good engineering practice.
Right.
And there was a document that was, I actually have a copy of it in my office, but there was a document called Good Engineering Practices, and it was developed back, I think, in the mid to late 30s, and really was a kind of a part of the FCC rules and regulations. And that's been used a lot over the years, but you don't hear it as much today.
But it sure is good to have that because especially not just to keep up with what you're doing, but it serves as sort of a history of your plant and things as you get old, like I'm getting old, is sometimes you forget and you say, well, we had the same problem with the transmitter 5 or 6 years ago. What do we do to fix it? Well, you can go back and look at previous maintenance logs and say, oh, here it is. We had to change that cap or whatever it was. So it's a good history of the operation of your facility.
Very true.
This is a biggie. Got to have your RF hazard signs, and I think there's like is it three different levels depending on the severity of the RF at the base?
Yeah, I believe that is correct. There's a level of green, there's a level of blue. Well, actually, I believe it's four. Then there's the yellow level, and then red. And most of us don't deal with situations that see red. It's usually yellow, green, or blue, depending on the situation. Most of the time that you get into a situation with serious RF is going to be on rooftop operations on tall buildings in cities.
Oh yeah, yeah. This is to actually protect the people that might come in contact or come around your facility to make sure they don't become in harm's way. We've already talked about EAS a little bit, but as John mentioned, you need to receive, and these are things that we check on when we do an inspection. Make sure that you're receiving the weekly tests from both assigned monitor sources and IPAWS, the integrated public alert warning systems. As John mentioned, it comes down around 11 o'clock local time, whatever time zone that you're in. You're also supposed to send your own weekly test on all stations, and you need to remember on all secondary audio and video streams. If you're running HD, FM HD, and you have an HD2 or 3 or 4, you have to run that test on all of those. And television, the same thing. If you've got a dot two, three, four, five, six, however many you've got, that that test has to actually go out on all of those streams. And that gets to be a little problem sometimes in television that has so many dot channels, and a lot of them are just pass through from some syndicated company. They have to make sure that their encoder is set up to interrupt all of those streams at the same time, or at, when you send out a test, it has to go out on all the streams.
That is correct, and I know depending with automation today, it makes it even more complex for a lot of stations in dealing with this because of the complexity of firing all this stuff off all at the same time. So it's something you do need to check on, and then you also need to check and confirm that it's actually airing on your station. So you want to be certain that when you are dealing with EAS, it's definitely one of those situations that you want to prove that the pass through is working as it should be.
That's correct. I have run into that on a couple of occasions where there's been some technical issue, especially in television. They changed out an automation system, and even though the EAS unit was originating the test, the automation system was not switching. So they, according to the log in the EAS unit, it showed that it went, but over the air it didn't. So you really have to do that in radio. There's an easy way to do that in radio. You can actually take one of your spare monitor inputs on your EAS decoder and feed an off the air signal to it. And that way you'll actually see in your log, you'll see it actually come in from a duplicate coming in from yourself. That tells you that it did go over the air. It's not a big problem as it is in television. But I did go to a radio station one time that I discovered that the unit was bypassed. They had just unplugged the in and out of the unit. And so although the law, they said, yeah, we're running them. And but yeah, by the log, but it was bypassed and not going on the air.
Yeah, I found that in a rebuild of a studio one time, and everything had looked impeccable on their logs and everything. And I walk around to the back of the unit when we were removing equipment out of the studio, and the audio was completely bypassed the EAS unit, but and you had no way of knowing otherwise unless you were listening on the air.
That's right. The other thing that we talked about on EAS, you must receive and relay a required a monthly test that's sent by some, normally a state agency in your state. And once you receive it, it has to be relayed over the air within a 60-minute window. As I recall, that used to be like a really short window, and it was always a problem trying to get it to fall in the a natural break on TV. And I think the SBE and the NAB petitioned the commission to open that window up to 60 minutes, and that's what that's set up to go now. Obviously, you have to receive and relay any kind of national emergency or a national test in all stations. And again, all secondary audio and video streams. There has not been a test of the national system, I think, correct me, John, if I'm wrong, but about 2 years or
That's correct. And I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that over the past 4 or 5 years, there has been a major revision of state EAS plans ongoing and renewal of those state plans. And I think that's why they've held back some. They want to get everything settled and every state approved so that they can run test with all the new plans and see how it works.
I did see just this morning on in the trades. I did see where there was a station. I forgot where it was. That was actually fined some for close to $30,000 for not having their EAS operating properly and missing uh, when we did do NPTs. They went back that far, National Periodic Tests. They did not relay those, and they actually got a fine from the commission for around $30,000, I think, for it or something. So you need to make sure that your EAS system is working correctly. All of this information, as John mentioned, needs to be put in the station log. And here's the key: usually at the end of the day, the station log must be reviewed and certified weekly by the station's chief operator. And you got to maintain them for 2 years. Now, the chief operator doesn't necessarily have to be the chief engineer, although it has to be somebody that has the knowledge of whether or not the station has been operating in accordance with the rules and their station authorization. So you don't want the receptionist to be your chief operator.
Very true.
And keep those for 2 years. Additional, let's see what else we got here. Required. Uh, Also, as John mentioned, the information about major malfunction of the tower lights and information concerning transmission failures or repairs if you've gone off the air for a short period of time or something that needs to be put in that log as well. Uh, then we go to the transmitter, and this is where we do a lot of technical stuff actually at the transmitter. We look at the tower and look at the painting if it's required to be painted. There's guidelines of how it's supposed to be painted, the number of bands, and based on the height of the tower, and the lighting. Again, based on the height of the tower, and it goes up in different increments, and the quality of the painting. John and I both have something called a chip chart, which is a special chart that shows the not only the hue of the red, but it also shows the reflectivity of that paint, and it has to be that painting is not something you just go down and buy. It's got to be aviation orange and white. I did have a sort of a humorous story. I had a one of the inspectors. I think it was out of the Atlanta office that he went by. He was coming through a town. He was not actually inspecting it. He was traveling back to Atlanta, and he saw a little AM station that it really looked bad. It had faded, and it was almost pink. The red had almost changed to pink, and he stopped and walked in, and the owner and his wife was there. They were older gentleman and lady, and he introduced himself. He said, "I'm from the FCC, and I thought I'd just tell you that your tower is getting pretty faded and needs to be painted." And the lady spoke up and she said, "Yeah, me and Paul were talking about that the other day, and we're going to get that painted. We noticed it looked sort of bad." He said, "Okay, just make sure that you do, and y'all have a nice day." So he left, and he came back several months later and drove by that same station, and it looked the same way. He said, "Oh man, I hate to go in there and get onto these folks," but he walked in, and as he walked in the front door, that lady said, "Hey, Mr. SCC man, how you like our tower? We got it painted about a week after you were here." He said, "Yeah, but the color's not right." She said, "Oh no, no. My son went out and broke off a piece of paint off the tower and took it down to Sherwin-Williams, and they matched it exactly." So there is some guidelines of how you're supposed to paint the tower. Uh, if it's strobe lit, typically you don't paint a strobe lit tower, high intensity strobe light tower. And I think does that apply to low level LEDs as well, John? Or
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it does. It depends on the height of the tower too.
right,
Uh, but uh, we've gotten now where painting has become kind of because of the cost involved and the number of towers involved, using the strobes or LEDs saves a lot of money on the painting side. Of course, I will mention one thing just for those people. Um, you have galvanized towers, and yes, there is a point in the galvanized tower's life that you may have to cold galvanize paint it. Uh, that's the term they use. But there's a special type paint because in certain areas of the country, rust and deterioration can happen to even really finely galvanized towers. And so just because it's galvanized doesn't mean you never have any maintenance on it.
That's correct. You have to watch out for that. There's a chip chart that I was telling you about. It has the actual color and the reflectivity because that paint is special paint that has a reflectivity value, so that it makes it easier for an airline pilot to see. This is just a picture one that obviously is needs to be adhered to a little bit.
Yeah.
We also look at on an FM the number of bays that's up on the tower to make sure that the number of bays matches what's on their license. Uh, I don't know about you, John, but I have run into that a couple of times. I went to one that had the license said that it had a 4 bay, but there was a 6 bay up there. So that's a no-no. You got to make sure you reapply and readjust your power for the change in the number of bays.
Yeah,
Uh,
and a lot of the licenses now have and have had over the years, it'll have a statement of the number of bays to achieve the ERP. And so if you're an Omni, that's kind of a standard way of doing things these days, but you have to adjust the ERP, or not the ERP, but the TPO of the transmitter. And so if you did increase the number of bays, you're going to, and say to 6 bays and it was 4 bays, or you had 6 bays and went down to four, you're going to have to calculate and verify that they had made a determination on what the actual TPO of the transmitter is. Now, if it's a directional antenna, that opens up another
sure.
whole set of rules because if you change the antenna out and you're directional, and you go to a different brand of antenna or a different model of antenna, then that requires a whole new application and construction permit because directional antennas, the patterns are, while technically they're all similar, they are still different, whether it be ERI or a dielectric or a JAMPRO or an SWR or a Shively. There are differences, and so that does require a filing, a CP, and modification of a license.
I will mention along that line, and I know we've got a couple more things to cover here, but one of the things that I've run into is on the FM licenses sometime, the TPO section where it says what the output of your transmitter is supposed to be will be blank.
Yes.
And I've often wondered how that gets through the commission's paperwork up there, but how does an engineer know what to adjust his transmitter for? So you have to have some documentation, either the original application that the consultant did, or you have actually run the program or done it. You can do it manually. We talk about in our classes that we have in Birmingham, we show how to calculate the TPO based on antenna gain, transmission line loss, and it will tell you what it is. So you'll run into that. Television is unique. Most of the TV licenses now, when you look at transmitter power output, it will have a little statement that says, as necessary to achieve authorized ERP.
Yeah.
There.
Now, I will chime in on that. If you go and look at the application for license, which is commonly known as Form 302,
Right.
there is a page that shows the detailed information about the antenna, the gain, the transmission line, the loss in the line, and the filtering. and how they determine power and what that power level is determined. And the same thing for FM. Uh, you just have to dig a little further and a little deeper. A lot of consultants would provide that information in a separate document when they filed to the commission. So I like to tell uh, stations that I'm inspecting, and if I have a copy, I'll leave it with them of that 302 document so that people know how the power was determined and what the power level is.
Yeah, I think that I've started doing that here lately is I'll actually go, you can go into the LMS section of the FCC rules and drill down in there and see that information. I usually copy that and print it and leave a copy with the engineer so that way he actually knows, oh, okay, this is what my transmitter output is supposed to be, and this is why it's supposed to be that. So, but that's something that one of the main things that when we go to the transmitter, that's one of the main things that we actually check is to make sure your TPO is correct. There's a picture of the one of the warning signs. We You want to make sure that the tower is where it's supposed to be. There are cases where they're not. Somebody didn't do their homework correctly, and I usually carry a GPS and if I'm going to a new site that I've never been to before, I'll usually check to make sure it's is correct and not a mile from where it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
Real quickly, we talk about power. I know you got to run because you've got an inspection coming up. I think.
I
But
do. I do have one right after we finish up our meeting, so we still have a little time.
okay, we'll just normally during on AM the accurate way of measuring the power of an AM is the antenna current, which is actually measuring how much current is actually power is going to the tower itself. This is the old type meter that you will see in some of the old ones. The new meters are digital or analog with a coupling that you can use. Here's one's reading 6.26, and that can be remotable up to your transmitter site. And I understand too, in talking to, I was talking to um, his name, the guy with Crawford, Chris Alexander.
Oh,
He said they don't normally do that anymore. The commission will actually allow you to have a separate meter at the transmitter, maybe a line meter that can be calibrated reference to the one that's down at the tower, and you can actually make the measurements up there.
yes,
So
but you do have to calibrate it on a regular
that,
basis or check it to be sure that it is calibrated.
that is correct. Now, of course, you can go back and use math and use the I square R will actually tell you what the current or the power should be down there. Now, this is a funny picture I saw one time. And you look at his meter, it's actually the needle is bent. It took a lightning hit, I think, and it actually ended up going backwards. If you're directional AM, that's another beast entirely. You don't normally read the antenna current at the base of the different towers in the array. You read the common point current going down, going through the phaser. So that's where you actually determine what your power is. But then you also have to look at their antenna monitor, and this is something we check. John and I check to make sure your license will actually give you the reading of what the power is or the current or is at each tower and what the phase relationship of that current is. That's what makes your pattern. So that's something that we normally do. This is just a two tower array here. Here's one that has 12 towers, and never seen a 12 tower before, but that's a new one. That's a big one.
Yeah, there are several of them around the country. I was actually at one in Canada a few years back, and the phaser building was in the middle of the array. The transmitter was at a different location. The phaser was in the middle of the array, and there was some distance between the two, but it was quite an interesting setup.
This one, as you see, has a digital reading down at the bottom, which is those are nice. They're a little expensive, I think. but I'm sure John George can show you one if you want one.
Well, to the best of my knowledge, too, I don't think they make an analog anymore. Everything is digital now, and it is a nice readout. There are two companies that still make them. Of course, Potomac has been around for years, and then Gorman Redlick still makes an AM antenna monitor, but they have to be calibrated on a regular basis, and they have to be checked on a regular basis, which the newer meters are much easier to deal with than the older analog type are.
So as far as the ABIP inspection on directional, that's something that we look at very closely to make sure the common point is correct and that the antenna monitor readings are, and I think I have maybe the next slide. Yeah, the current ratio has a limit of plus or minus 5%, and the phase ratio of each tower has a limit of plus or minus 3 degrees. So we look at the license, John and I do, and make sure that the readings on each one of the towers is correct. The question comes up, John, and you might comment on the need to go and actually read monitor points in a directional array.
Well, again, this comes under good engineering practice, and of course there is the what we call the mom proof, which that is actually a setup and testing using an analyzer, and you file with the commission, and then you're not required to do monitor point readings on a regular basis. It's all done using the antenna monitor. And mom proofs are quite reliable and good to deal with. But there are more stations that have to do monitor points or check monitor points because they are not set up uh, on the mom. And those stations, I recommend a minimum of every 6 months. Most of the really good AM directionals I see, they check it quarterly. Some of them even check it monthly. But you have to realize that not doing this, and especially if the antenna system's in a urbanized area, things are changing constantly, which means your antenna pattern will change with construction of buildings and highways and everything else. So I personally like quarterly myself, but I would at least minimal every 6 months.
The reading on the antenna monitor, while it's accurately, it's only showing what's happening at the base of the tower, not
That
what's
is
happening out in the field.
that is correct. And of course, yeah, the station is also supposed to have a field intensity meter so that they can check these points. And we personally like to see that the station does have a field intensity meter and they're utilizing it to do the meter readings with. I know when the commission does do inspections and they're looking at AM directionals, the readings are normally done with the station's antenna monitor to determine the accuracy of the monitor and everything else.
Normally, those have to be calibrated uh, on a periodic. I think it's, I don't know if it's annual
The
or
recommendation, it's kind of open, but the ideal situation is every 2 years.
yeah, here's one right here. Not a very good picture. It's out of focus, but that's a field meter there that you can take out and look on your license. The license will actually tell you how many kilometers it is from the tower and on what azimuth. And you go out to that point, and it will tell you that that point should not exceed so many millivolts per meter. So that verifies that your array is in. Uh, oh, this is about towers, fencing around towers. AM towers have to be fenced in per FCC rules. And this is one of the things, and I don't know about your inspections, John, but I see this a lot where fences are not being maintained. They're
Yes,
they're either wooden and part of it's fell down, or the gates are not locked, or has no gate. But there's a little chart that tells you based on your frequency and your power on how many how many meters away from the tower the fence needs to be. But the big thing is make sure that it's maintained. Here's a picture of one where, as you can see, the slats have fell down, and somebody could reach in there, and obviously that feed line that's coiled there, a tube, that's hot with RF, so it's a danger. And I think I have another picture here. This is sort of a funny one that I saw where the fence had fell down and they put just sort of, I don't know what you call that stuff, construction mesh tower fence, but that would be a no-no. So one of
Yeah.
the things
Well,
we
not
look
only
at,
that, the fence that they have there, it would probably not be acceptable if it was in good condition because of the low height. Fences have to be high enough that it is impossible for somebody to crawl over or
Mhm.
crawl under or crawl through. And so typically 5 to 6 feet in height is acceptable. That one looks like it might be more like 4 or 5 feet. It definitely needs to be higher.
I've had questions from engineers about using chain link fences. While that's okay on lower power stations, if you get higher power, then you can run into some problems with RF actually in the metal of the fence itself, and quite often you would have to ground part of the fence to keep that down.
Yeah. Yeah, usually the gate is the issue. I mean, I've seen some stations with 5 and 10 kilowatts that if the gate itself wasn't grounded properly, you will get some arcing between the hasp of the gate and the post that it connects to or the chain around it. So you do have to be careful. Higher powers, uh, uh, wood is very acceptable as long as it's done properly and mounted properly so it won't go anywhere. But I have seen some chain link situations.
Make
And
sure that the gate that you have is locked. Now, obviously, this one is locked, but half the hasp is gone, so you need to make sure that's acceptable. If real quickly, we'll look at FM power. Normally, you can either use the through line watt meter. However, it has to be calibrated into a 50 ohm dummy load to make sure that it's reading correctly. Most people use the indirect method where you just multiply the uh, plate voltage times plate current, or to use modern terms, supply voltage and supply current time the efficiency of the transmitter to come up with what the actual power is. There's the old tube type, the volts and the current. I will normally, if a station is running HD, just as a general, oh yeah, look and see. I will look at their analyze if they have an analyzer. I'll look and see what the did those two units on the side. The middle is the analog signal, and the digital signal is on each side. It's not something as far as the inspection is concerned, but I always look and see if that's the case. The same thing with television. Sometimes they have a way to look at the mask to see. TV is pretty simple. They normally have an RF meter. This is an Agilent RF meter, and it takes a power sample actually from the output of the mass filter. And remember, that's where it has to go, not the output of the transmitter, but the output of the mass filter. There'll be a little difference. The transmitter will be running a little bit higher power because you'll have some loss in the filter. Not much, but this is the way that TV normally does theirs.
yeah, and those meters should be calibrated usually about every 2 years because they will wander out of calibration, and you want to be certain that these are accurate.
Right. There's some calibration, self calibration that you do when you hook it up. The cable that you see plugged into it, you actually loop it around to the end connector you see at the top, and you calibrate it so that you know that the you take the cable into consideration too when you're making the measurement. Other items, and real quickly, maintenance log. We did that in the transmitter. Mean, and you might comment on this. briefly, means and procedure to maintain correct modulation level.
Well, there are two ways to look at it. You can look at if you have a good spectrum analyzer, and I mean that's something like an Agilent or so. Uh, you can look at occupied bandwidth, and so there's two school of thought. Most people use a modulation monitor, and the modulation monitor really needs to be calibrated every few years because as any piece of equipment ages, the power supplies all in the modulation monitor will age and you will get improper modulation readings. But the newer transmitters do give you some really good accurate modulation readings as well as a spectral analysis of your bandwidth. So there needs to be some measure of modulation because if you're going to be out there and especially cranking up the modulation and competing in a marketplace, though that's kind of gone by the wayside these days. You need to either have a current accurately calibrated modulation monitor or a spectrum analyzer of that's been recently calibrated as well too, and look at the occupied bandwidth.
And television is another animal. And I had a discussion with Skip Peasy a while back about that. And there is no way to measure audio level since it's embedded in the stream.
Right.
And he said the normal thing in television is the encoder, uh, when the stream is put together, if you're hitting at 0 dBFS, that's considered the legal limit, but there's no way to actually measure audio modulation since it's embedded in the stream.
Yeah, that is correct. So there, and of course you have to be careful with DBFS, as you and I both talked about many times. That zero on DBFS, depending on the use of the particular component, could provide distortion if you're exceeding that zero limit.
That's right. Most of the meters now, the DBFS meters, have the ability to look at true peak, and that's where the distortion comes. Is the instantaneous peaks that a normal device doesn't show. So that's some new terminology that we're using now in the business. And
Correct.
let's see, means and procedure to maintain correct frequency. That's sort of a no-brainer. However, the commission doesn't really. They do have limits for AM, FM, and television, but most stations now that I go to, they don't have anything to measure with.
No, and the newer transmitters, the solid state transmitters, are very stable. It's not like the old days when you were dealing with crystals and other forms of determining a frequency.
Yeah, if you've got a counter that's calibrated with WWV, you can use that.
Yes,
Television to read, they actually have a statement in the rules that you have to have a way to assure that the pilot frequency is correct. And the only way that you can do that really is with a spectrum analyzer. And
right.
if I think it's 1.5 kilohertz below the lower edge of the band or something, I think that's right. But that's the only way you can actually do it. There's not a modulation meter
Yes.
or a frequency meter. Uh, let's see here. I think that about covers everything we actually talk about, John. And unless you have something that you normally inspect that we didn't talk about.
No, I think we pretty much covered it all. Every site is slightly different, and if you show up at an AM site and the grass is 3 feet high, I'm going to probably make some recommendations that they cut the field, even though that's not part of the inspection, but that's just good engineering practice, especially as dry as it's been in most of the country. It's easy to drive a vehicle into a field with a lot of grass and set the grass on fire just from the heat of the car, and you could have a real bad problem on your hands. Uh, Also, I'll mention quickly that a lot of those folks that have long driveways to their tower sites, that you definitely have to have signage at the gate that blocks the road. That might be a mile away, but you have to have the proper signage with the ASR number on it there, as well as at the tower site. So just little minor things.
Yeah, that's correct. The if you have to, I think it says if you have to have it go through a gate to a normal access road, then you have to have the ASR number there as well as down at the tower.
That
Uh,
is correct.
Finally, and I know you got to run, but the maintaining the site as far as vegetation growth, that's a biggie on all trails,
Yeah,
but especially AEM. You don't want stuff growing up in the field because that can cut down on your efficiency. Although that's not something that's on the ABIP checklist, that's something I will always take a look at is how well the site is being maintained.
very true.
Yeah, and guy anchors, checking those
Yes. Oh, definitely.
and the paths and all. There was a tower here in Alabama that came down a few weeks ago. Wasn't because anything hit the tower, but a tree fell and fell over the guy wire, and it took the tower down. So you have to maintain those as well. Well, John, we sort of run out of time. I appreciate you being with us today,
Oh, sure.
and enjoy your ABIP inspection you're fixing to go
All
on,
right.
and he'll be covering a lot of this stuff with that client that we went over today. So
Definitely will be.
that being said,
Always, always a pleasure.
that's right. We'll end the show today, and we'll see you again. I guess it'll be what September, won't it?
Yes.
It'll be in the fall. Maybe it'll be under three digits then.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, John, and thank
All
you
right.
people for
Thank you.
joining. Okay. See you.